recording started. Okay, so welcome. I am in the Mariah's greenhouse right now. It smells lovely. It's nice and warm. Not much wrong with the greenhouse. So today we're going to talk about patio pots. Let me get my PowerPoint moving here. So I'm going to start with some container basics, making sure you have the right soil, some general maintenance for your garden, or for your patio pots. And then I'm going to turn it over to Lynne Knobel, and she will be doing some example pots. She'll be planting some. And just real quick before I really get going here, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I'll try and monitor that as best I can. I might pause every couple minutes just to make sure. Or you can unmute yourself and ask them, whatever you are more comfortable with. So first off, let's talk about container basics. First of all, choosing the right pot, that is half your battle. Use whatever material you want. In my slide here, I've got some dinnerware kind of stuff. That works fine. Clay, plastic, whiskey barrels, wire baskets lined with moss, even some cement paving stones if you want to use those work too. The only thing you should really work to avoid are toxic materials. So if you have something with lead paint, maybe don't plant vegetables in it. Probably don't want to eat that. But other than that, use literally whatever you want. It's important to pick the right size and weight for your pots. Think about what's going in it and what you're going to do with it. Do you plan on moving that pot? Are you going to leave it outside for the summer and bring it inside during the winter? So for example, I started an avocado tree this year. While it's fine outside in the summer, our winters are a bit too chilly for a Mexican plant, so I'm going to be moving it inside for the winters. So because of that, I'm going to want a fairly light pot or a pot on wheels that I can move easily so I don't break my back trying to bring my plants inside. If it's just going to stay on your patio all year long, don't worry about how heavy your plant is. Don't worry about if it's got wheels. Sky's the limit. You also want it large enough so that your plants won't dry out between waterings. Remember, soil holds the water. So if you want a low maintenance plant, a bigger pot that won't dry out as fast is better for you. And it also needs to be large enough to hold the roots of your plant. 6 to 10 inches around will work for most herbs and small little grassy plants or little flowers. And 5 gallons or bigger would be better for tomatoes or other vegetables or bigger bushes. And finally, drainage. Drainage is a huge issue. I can't tell you how many problems I see with watering in plants. Porous materials like clay are going to drain better than plastic containers. And you're going to want some drainage holes in your container if you can. If you don't have them, you can drill a hole in the bottom of the pot. That's easy if you have the tools. You can put in an inch of coarse gravel. Or if you have a big, heavy clay pot that you can't drill a hole in the bottom, use a plastic insert and throw a brick underneath there so it's got lots of room to drain and breathe. If it doesn't drain, the soil's going to hold on to too much water, the roots aren't going to get enough oxygen, and then you'll get root rot. And then when the roots die, everything dies. That is kind of how plants work, unfortunately. So let's go into soil. And again, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat, or if you have any questions, go ahead and ask. So soil is really, really important, obviously, unless you have an air plant or you've got some aquaponics going on. So soil provides water, nutrients, and it anchors the plant to the ground, or in this case, to your pots. So a good potting mix will hold the water and nutrients well, but not too tightly. Remember, we want soil that drains well. We want oxygen to get in there. We don't want the roots to rot. One that's high in organic matter will be really good for a high nutrient content and good drainage. pH is also really important. Vegetables and flowers like slightly acidic pHs from about 5 to 7. So if you're really curious about the soil pH I do have a pH meter in my office, and I love to come out and pH test soil. I just spent about a week doing it out in the field. Most potting mixes you buy will be in that 5 to 7 range, so you probably don't need to test it. But if you're really curious, we sure can. Most potting soil mixes I would recommend over your own garden soil, just because our soils here in the triangle tend to be really full of clay, and clay does not drain well. I'm sure you all have seen our wonderful clay fields. They tend to hold water really, really well, which is great, but it also doesn't drain and you get root rot issues. I know my personal garden is mostly clay, and that is why I don't grow anything in it. Soilless mixes also work just fine. They contain things like peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, composted manure, a whole bunch of other things, whatever the company could get a hold of, pretty much. They mix it together to result in a really nutritious, lightweight, well-drained mix. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with soilless mixes. I think Miracle Grow has a bunch of soilless mixes. Pretty much with soil, if you're buying potting soil either from, I don't know, do you sell potting soil?
I do sell.
Lynne sells potting soil. One-stop shop.
My potting soil has mycorrhizal in it.
And Lynne's potting soil has mycorrhiza, which is always beneficial for roots. If you just go to pretty much anywhere and get potting soil, it'll be just fine. If you want to be a little cheap because you have a giant pot, you can mix in a little bit of your garden soil. I wouldn't go more than 50% though, just because it is probably going to be really full of clay. And our soil here tends to be fairly high pH as well. So we're not going to want to do a lot of that. And then maintenance, we want to maintain our pots. We want them to grow forever. First and foremost, proper watering. Don't overwater or underwater your plants. We don't want them to drown, but we also don't want them to completely dry out. So once a day is probably lots, unless it's really, really hot and windy out. When it's hot and windy, your plants are going to dry out a lot quicker because the stomata are going to be open. They're going to be evaporating out of the plants. So if you're in a concern about your plants being overwatered or underwatered, a really good way to test it is to just stick your finger in the dirt or in the soil. If the soil is moist, you're probably fine. If it's dry, give it a good water. And when you're watering, always just water steadily until water starts to come out the drainage hole in the bottom. If you don't have a drainage hole, that makes it a little bit more difficult. But that kind of is going to come with experience to your pot. Constantly checking it will probably be helpful. Get a good idea. I know there are also little wine bottle things that you can stick in there, or garden buddies. Keep them well watered. If you want to do that, it's totally fine. Also avoid wetting the foliage of the plants. This can lead to some disease, so make sure you're watering the soil, not the leaves. And if you are like me and you struggle with attention span and watering your flowers, succulents are a great option because they store the water in their roots instead of in the soil around them. So succulents love being ignored, and that is what I like about them. Light, the more light the better. Obviously, this is how plants get their food, through photosynthesis. So you want your plants in as sunny as a location as possible. Some leafy vegetables and root vegetables do better in partial shade, but they still need light. Every plant needs light, or most plants need light. If they're in your house, place them in a south-facing window. They'll do great. My avocado tree loves my south-facing window. And if it's in your yard, just make sure it's in a really sunny location. Try and avoid any shady places. Or if you have a spot right beside your house that the shade is most of the day, not a great place unless you're growing like a lettuce or a potato. And then regularly harvest. If you're growing vegetables or fruits or herbs or something, regularly harvest those to keep them from going dormant. And, keep your flowers looking good, deadhead them. If you keep kind of taking little bits off of them, kind of like with pruning trees, they'll continue growing. So if you want them to start going dormant, just leave them alone. Don't look at them. They might get kind of ugly, but they'll go dormant anyways. So that's all I've got, and I'm going to pause here. Hold on. Do we have any questions? I'll just wait a couple minutes, open the chat. If you have any questions, then Lynne will go into some pots that she's got going. We'll wait a couple seconds here. Play the Jeopardy music if I had it. Lynne's got it. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So, if Lynne is ready, I will turn it over to Lynne And she's going to appear here soon. There she is.
Ta-da.
Perfect. And I will get out of the PowerPoint, actually. Stop sharing. All right. So, Lynn is going to go over some examples.
Plants.
Yeah.
So, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. I would like to say what we usually tell people when we do pots is we like to use a thriller, a filler, and then a spiller. And so some examples of, I will show you some examples of fillers here and a spiller, and then I'm going to interchange some thrillers so you can see how it will look different. So these geraniums are good examples of a filler. And I will put, let me see, I'll put this little spiller in front. It's a verbena, a trailing verbena. And then the one you are probably the most familiar with would be a dracaena, or people call them spikes. We like salvias because they're real pretty and they bloom. And a lot of salvias also attract bees and hummingbirds. This is one salvia. Here's another salvia that's big and arching and quite pretty and interesting. So when you're picking out plants, what you can do is just put them together in the greenhouse and kind of see what you like. That's a cleome. And then the last thriller I'm going to show you is called hummingbird mint. And the hummingbirds like it because it has a tubular shaped flower, and that's what they like to get their beak down in there. The hummingbird mint also has a really beautiful smelling fragrance. And that's something you could think about too when you're putting a pot together, is if it will be fragrant. So I think I showed you enough of the thrillers. I'll show you a couple more examples of fillers. And some thrillers can also be fillers, like this cleome could also be a filler. And here's some upright verbena that would be a nice filler. Let me put a little spike back here so you get an idea of that. Here's another verbena. And so people always ask too about colors, like what colors go together? And we have ideas about colors that aren't true because Mother Nature is right, and all colors actually go together. And a lot of people would not think about putting red and pink together, but I have an example here of red and pink that is really beautiful, and it's on one plant. So when you're going to do your pot, you need to think about some basics like soil, and Adriane talked about that. The soil I like to get is a soilless soil mix, which is bark and peat, decomposed bark and peat. And it is real light, like that. It drains well. It also has perlite. This has perlite in it, and it drains well. And if you buy nice soil to begin with, you can use the same soil over and over in your pots. You don't have to dump it out every year.
Do you want me to grab a handful?
Sure.
Just a closer look of this soilless mix she's got.
Yep. So, and I'm a big fan of that. If you have a big pot, Adriane mentioned that you can put your own soil, like dirt from out in the pasture underneath. But if it's too heavy, you can also do crushed up plants and pots. Sometimes we will take a bigger pot, and turn it upside down in the bottom of the pot to take up some of that space. And it does drain real well if you have that pot as well. So you need to think about whether you're planting in the sun or in the shade. And if you're planting in the...
Sorry.
You want to put it on that chair?
This one? Sorry, we'll get closer here.
Should work better.
Yep. There we go.
Perfect. So if you're looking at shade, then you need to think about begonias and some plants that will do well in the shade. And when you start dealing with shade plants, you are going to deal with plants that are probably not going to bloom as much as a petunia or geranium, but you still do get nice blooms. So here are like some begonias, and I'm just going to give you an idea of something you could do for a shade pot. Oh, I'm looking for this guy. So here's an example of our filler, which is the begonias. And I popped them up a little bit so that they make the pot look more dimensional. But a filler and a spiller and a thriller. And that would do very well in the shade. So next, something we think about mixing up pots, and I just talked about color. So another thing I really like, I like monoculture. And so in a monoculture, you might do, for instance, all geraniums. And this geranium that I have setting here is Calliope Red geranium, Calliope Dark Red. And it's the #1 selling geranium in the world. And it's not a true zonal geranium. It's a cross between a zonal geranium and ivy geranium. And that's how they got the unusual red color that they didn't have before. Let's see. I was going to talk a little bit about fertilizer. It is good to fertilize your pots once a week. I like to use a fertilizer that dissolves in water, so a soluble fertilizer. You can use the fertilizer that you sprinkle on top. You're not going to get as good of a feed out of that as you will the soluble fertilizer. So some kinds of pots that we like to do are foliage pots, which you don't see that often, but they are fun. And you can use like coleus. We like to use coleus in a foliage pot. Here's a thriller that I didn't show before, but it is eucalyptus, which makes a really lovely pot. And we'll use that. Here's a lamium, which is a foliage. And this is called Midnight Sun, and it's new this year. And it is also a perennial, zone 3, although we're selling it kind of in our annual section. But that's really lovely. And I love foliage pots. They're just real pretty. They're interesting. You get different textures with the leaves and different colors. So it's quite nice. And this is something, too, that can grow well in the shade. Let's get those out of there. My cat is coming to visit. We hope she doesn't jump up here. So another thing that I like to do is succulent gardens. And succulent gardens are another one of those things that you just have to get your container. And if you're doing a succulent garden, we usually recommend you use a container that is shallow, because then you have a less tendency to overwater it. And so succulent gardens, there's no right or wrong thing to do with them. This is actually a little lavender. It's Merlot lavender, and it likes it dry too. It's not a true succulent. So you can put things in with your succulent gardens that are not true succulents. This one is called Calico Kitten, which is a little more traily and flat. This lavender will get taller. So it is like having a thriller in the middle. And then, like I said, the Calico Cat is a little bit like is a little bit more like a spiller. but you can kind of get an idea of how that would look. And if you were at the greenhouse or at somebody's greenhouse, you could probably get your pot. You can either bring your pot or buy one there, and then just kind of load it up how you think you would like it, and that's how you'll know what would look good. Cat loves me. And another idea for container gardens are herbs. And herbs are a wonderful thing because then you can cut them and use them, and just they're really fun. And so in this herb one, I have some sage. Sage is perennial. So if you can use perennials in pots. If you remember which ones are perennials, at the end of the season, you can dig them up and put them in the ground, and they'll come back next year. Here is a mint, peppermint. It's also perennial. Basil is not. Thyme sometimes will come back, sometimes doesn't. And the same with oregano. And then I have chives in the middle. And if you want to be really creative and do something interesting, what you can do is have like a pesto pot, or one that is for that you're using for pasta. So you might put your basil, your oregano, and some thyme in there. The chives would be good in there as well. And I really love herbs. They just add so much spice to our lives. Another way, another thing you can do with pots, you can grow some plants that will deter bugs, like lemongrass. Here's lemon verbena and lemon balm. And they all smell very good, and you can use them in cooking, and they also deter mosquitoes. I like that. Sometimes when we do pots, I had mentioned this earlier, you might want to do things that are fragrant. You can do heliotrope. There's some artemisias that are quite fragrant, and those are kind of fun to put in your pot as well. Something else we'll do sometimes for a thriller is we'll do a trellis. And so you can put in something to trellis a plant on. Let me see. And these black-eyed Susan vines are real pretty in the back of a pot. And then they will trellis up this. And it is real pretty. And plus you have the color. And a few years ago, I think you all remember, we had orange petunias, but they were pulled off the market because they were not registered correctly through the GMO or the powers that be. So it is nice to get some orange through the black-eyed Susan vine. Let me see here. Oh, I've just got a question about hanging baskets. Now, our hanging baskets are quite full, and people ask how many plants we put in them, and we put 6 in them. But if you were going to do a hanging basket this time of year, I would put 4 in, because that's plenty, and it will grow out to be a nice hanging basket. We don't use anything smaller than a 12-inch pot, because then it's a watering nightmare. And then speaking of pots, you can also put vegetables in pots, and they're really nice. It's nice to have something there that you can eat off of. And we do these, we have some trailing little tomatoes. They're cherry tomatoes, and people seem to really love them. And we have do those every year. We have them already in the basket, but we have them in single pots too. So let me see. Trellis. So now I'm gonna plant a pot, so you kind of get an idea of how we plant them. So my thing is filled with dirt most of the way up. I might have to add some more. So first I'm going to put in what would be my spiller. And this spiller is, a lot of the spillers anymore are fillers and spillers. And this one is a Biddens that is somewhat upright, but it is also will start to spill over too. But I just think it's a real beautiful color. I love yellow. As far as colors go, when you're worried about colors, the colors that will go with anything is white, yellow, and blue. And when I say blue in the nursery culture, it's actually purple. We call it blue. And then that pot was not root bound, but what you can do if you have something that is root bound and you're taking it out, you can loosen up these roots just a little bit. And I don't know if you've done planted 4-packs before, and then when you start digging them out the next year, you see they're still in that same root ball. That's what happens when a plant becomes too root bound. And that's part of the reason why we grow our pots. We grow in such big pots. So we put dirt, make sure we get it in there all the way around. And you want to pack it a little bit. And you don't need to pack too much, but you do need it so the soil level is all even all the way around. And I like to clean up any debris that's underneath there too, the dead leaves. It's always good to keep plants clean. And part of the reason why we start out with soilless soil mix is it's sterilized and you won't get any pathogens. And by that I mean you could get powdery mildew or fungus of some sort. It could be carried in your soil and you don't want that. Packing this some more. One thing I didn't talk about, you need to think about when you're doing a pot, are you going to see that pot from all angles, or are you just going to have it up against your house? If you have it up against your house, you would have your thriller in the back. If you see it from all angles, you put the thriller in the middle. And that's something we always ask people when we're doing their pots for them. And let's see. I'll use this salvia. I think is quite pretty with those colors. It's that, what we call blue again in the nursery tray, and it goes with everything. And at our nursery, if people want to, and I'm going to have to go get some more soil to finish that. If people want to, we will let people come out and plant on our table, or we'll help them if they would like. And we do a lot of custom pots too. And that, I think, is mostly what I was going to talk about.
We have
herb garden, succulent, foliage, fragrant, mosquito. Yeah.
So we have a question.
Okay.
Susie has 2 old wagons that I would like to plant. What type of flower would you recommend for a shallow wagon?
It depends how shallow it is and how often you're willing to water. There is a product called Soil Moist that you can add to the wagon, and it's a polymer, and it's the same thing that's in babies' diapers, essentially. And it absorbs water, and then as things dry out, it releases water into the soil. That's something you can do. We've had people bring babies' diapers in when we're planting up their pots and say, could you put this in the bottom of the pot? So, and as long as you don't have it smothering and making things too wet. What I would do in a wagon, it depends. If I wanted to see the structure of the wagon, I would put something that would be more upright. Geraniums are really drought tolerant. That would be more upright. If I wanted something to be spilling over, I would go with petunias because they're just so hardy and easy to grow.
Okay. So. Can you do strawberries in pots, and how would you winter them?
You can do strawberries in pots. People ask me this all the time. They want to keep it in the pot outside, but as soon as you have plants above ground, it's too cold for them in our where we live. to winter over. They'll winter kill in the pot. So what you need to do is either put them in a garage that maybe is around 40 degrees. A lot of times they still will rot, or they're not happy. Plants like light. But if you can do a dormancy where they are not so frozen, that would be one way to do it.
Okay. So we don't have any more questions right now, but if you have one, please ask. I am going to open a poll. Hopefully you guys can see that. If you could complete the poll. And I'm also going to share some files with you guys. I have a couple guides that you might want to like or want to check out. We have Can I Grow That here, which is full of vegetables that you can or maybe can't grow in Montana. A really good guide from Colorado on container gardens. And then one from Texas on gardening with vegetable containers. So you can download those right from there if you want. Finish that survey if you don't mind. And we'll take any questions if they pop up. Go back to the flowers because those are more exciting.
Someone asked earlier about doing strawberries in pots. We do have some strawberries in pots. We have this variety that is pink flowering, so it's a little more ornamental. They've been on the market for not a long time. At first they were not zoned for zone 4, but they are now, so they could possibly winter over here. I'm a big proponent of go ahead and use it in a hanging basket or a pot, and at the end of the year, plop it in your ground somewhere. That's the best way to keep it over.
Okay, we've got a couple people finishing. What type of pots are best, clay or plastic? I talked about that a little, but Lynn, your opinion.
Clear or plastic?
Clay.
Clay. Clay will breathe some. Either is fine. You can grow well in either kind. Some people, I think, have told me they thought their stuff in clay pots dried out for them. But I think it should be fine. If we're doing something that's really permeable, like a moss basket, sometimes we'll line it with plastic, or at least line the bottom with plastic. We will poke a couple holes in it, but we do line it. Thinking it like this. So these cocoa liners are very permeable. And so we put, with my begonias, and it depends what you're putting in them, we just put something at the bottom that kind of helps keep the water. Because begonias like all that oxygen in there, and they like to be able to really breathe. And begonias are one of those things that I don't water a begonia until it starts to look a certain way, and then I water it. So if people are having problems with begonias, it's probably because they've been overwatered. They're real easy to grow.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Any questions from you guys? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you all for joining. I feel weird talking at my belly. Download those guides if you want them. Lynn has a couple guides here at the greenhouse too. I've got the succulent guide and the tomato guide here. You can also contact me or Lynn anytime. Well, not anytime you want. Please don't call us in the middle of the night. But with gardening questions, both of us are happy to answer them. And with that, thank you all. I'll let the last couple of you finish up your survey there, and then we will let you know if we have more webinars. Thanks for joining us.